Hey everyone, I've been reading some novels lately that I've been enjoying, but not a lot happens in them. They'll meander, they have beautiful descriptions, they offer subtle, interesting perspectives, and that's all great. A novel doesn't have to have a romping story in order to be meaningful, but at the same time, while I'm reading it, I'll find my thoughts are drifting off and I'll sort of start looking out the window or wanting to check my phone, and it made me wonder what books have I read that have absolutely gripped me, literally made me stay up late at night because I need to know what happens next. So I looked through my bookshelves and I picked out 10 books which I think are absolute page turners. First, I have Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and this is the book that I always think of whenever I imagine a richly plotted story. It has so many twists and turns, it just completely delighted and surprised me and completely transported me back to Victorian England with pickpockets and outlaws and a lady who has to live under a hideous man and lesbian desire. And I just loved it. I know so many people adore this novel, and Sarah Waters is such a great writer. And a really wonderful thing I found when I got down my copy of this novel was I looked inside and saw a ticket for the Orange Prize, which is what the Women's Prize used to be called, way back in 2002 when this novel was shortlisted for that award. So obviously I went to see Sarah Waters read from it, but I don't really remember that event. But also there's a bookmark from the 2002 Booker Prize because it was also shortlisted for that prize. It didn't win either award, but it really should have won some award because it's amazing. Such Small Hands by Andreas Barba and translated by Lisa Dillman. This novel is so creepy. It's quite short too, so it is a novel that you could actually read all in one go. And it gets the sensation of being a child better than any novel I can think of. It starts with a tragedy where a girl's parents die in a car crash and she's sent to an orphanage, and there the other girls she meets don't see her so much as a person but as a doll that they can do with what they will. It's so tense and thrilling, but also really psychologically insightful. Another book with many nail-biting moments and that kept me reading is the book of short stories The Doll Master by Joyce Carol Oates. Now, Oates has published several collections of short stories which veer into horror and the gothic, and when I interviewed Oates recently, she mentioned how she has an affinity for writing characters whose minds become so warped, and these stories draw us into the psychology of their characters as they gradually lose control and we feel them falling into these intensely horrifying situations. A novel that also gives a close perspective of someone whose life is veering out of control is My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and as the title suggests, this is about a character whose sister periodically kills men, and she enables this by helping her cover up these crimes. As the novel goes on, it becomes more complex and really interesting, and it had me gripped, wanting to know why they were doing this, what was going to happen next, and if they were going to be caught. But I have to say also, I don't think a book has to be about terror and murder in order to be gripping. I think great comic stories can do this as well, and Patrick Dennis's novel Antemain is riveting in how funny it is. It's a series of episodic tales about an orphaned boy who goes to live with a wonderfully eccentric aunt, the kind of wild woman that I wish I was raised by. It is so fabulous and hilarious, and there's also a film version from the 50s starring Rosalind Russell, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Another novel that gripped me and surprised me is The Butcher's Hook by Janet Ellis. This story is set in Georgian England, and it seems to be a romance at first, about a lonely girl who strikes up a relationship with a butcher's apprentice, but then it becomes much more dark and twisted as the steely determination and savage spirit of this girl is revealed. Now, I'm not someone naturally drawn to seafaring adventure stories, but The Northwater by Ian McGuire had me totally hooked. It's the story of a 19th century whaling ship traveling into the Arctic, and on board the ship is a violent killer. This novel gave me the chills. Literally, I felt like I was with these sailors traveling up into the freezing cold, icy landscape of the Arctic, and I had to know what happened to them. But I also love how this novel cleverly critiques masculinity, so it's not your traditional tough guy story. A book that explores girlhood and gender dynamics in such a fascinating and gripping way is Unbecoming by Una. This is a graphic novel set in the 1970s during the time when a serial killer is in England, and he's dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. And it's about a girl who's the recipient of violence, and it's about a culture where male violence goes unpunished and the consequences of that. It is so moving and mesmerizing how it's done. I think a great family saga has the potential to be thoroughly gripping as well, and Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi is a perfect example of that. The story of two African sisters, one who is sold into slavery and the other who becomes a slave trader's wife, and how it follows subsequent generations of that as their family is shaped by history, or are they the ones that are shaping history? And I found that with each generation, I wanted to know more about their stories, but I also wanted to know what was going to happen to their children. So it just kept me gripped all the way throughout. And I found the way that certain imagery and symbols sort of reverberated down through the generations was so beautifully done and incredibly moving. And finally, I have an artful dystopian novel that kept me up at night. Cormac McCarthy's The Road depicts a terrifying world that's been completely ravaged and tells the story of a father and son who are seeking shelter, and it also has the most terrifying scene I've ever read, where they open the door to a basement and realize they've made a horrendous mistake. It's nightmarish, but McCarthy also writes with such sensitivity and tenderness that I found it so moving and was completely drawn into the story. So those are my picks. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about any of these books, if you've read them or if you want to read them now. Also let me know some of your picks. What are some of the best page turners that you have ever read? I know people like to say, I couldn't put this book down, and I don't always completely believe that, but it is true. Sometimes books can grip us so much we have to read all the way to the end. Thank you for watching. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye, everyone.